Today we're going to talk about how often, as an amateur, you should be racing. One of the big mistakes we see is amateur athletes trying to race every weekend. If you want to be the best runner you can be, you should not be racing every weekend. Elite athletes are a very good example of this, where they choose a handful of races throughout a year or throughout a season as their main target events, and they work towards those events as their main races where they're trying to perform.
There are two key aspects to why you don't want to race too often. And the first of those is that when we race, regardless of the distance you race, you don't push yourself the way you push yourself in a race at any other time. And really what that means is that you don't cause the same amount of damage or burn the same amount of psychological stress as you do when you race. It takes a lot of concentration to really push yourself hard over any distance. So if you're going to race every single weekend, you're going to become mentally stale and unable to take yourself to the places that you need to take yourself to really achieve when you are racing. And secondly, you're going to continuously be doing this damage that you don't do at any other point, because that's when we really sort of preparing ourselves. So we're preparing ourselves to really push ourselves to the extreme. So therefore we do a fair amount of damage. Now, if you're doing that every week or every second week, it's only going to be a matter of time before you break down with injury or become so mentally stale that you just can't drive yourself anymore. To be able to consistently improve over a period of time, you want to work towards those races in a very systematic way. And that doesn't matter whether we're training for a 5 kilometer, a marathon or an ultra marathon, because they've all got different aspects that are important to that performance. And if we're talking about a 5K, for example, over a period of time, we really want to stretch the body, push ourselves, work hard on both the anaerobic component as well as the neuromuscular component, because for a lot of us in the 5K, one of our limitations is just being able to move our limbs fast enough to get through each stride. And to do that, we can build up systematically over a period of time, first laying the foundation with the strength, then moving into the anaerobic component and finishing it off with that neuromuscular component for our best performance on race day. Fortunately, when you get yourself to that level on a 5K, you can probably race a couple of 5Ks, whereas on the longer races, and we'll unpack that a bit later in the video, we need more preparation time and B, more recovery time. But essentially, you don't want to race every weekend so that you can give yourself time to prepare properly and get your best performance. And secondly, so that we don't overdo it, break down, get mentally stale and get injured.
Let's talk about the difference between racing and running a race. Racing is obviously where you're trying to perform. You might be trying to run a PB, you might be trying to podium and get the best possible result that you can. That is racing, and that's what we talk about, picking the handfuls and a couple of the main events throughout the season that you want to work towards. Running a race, however, is still following a training plan. So if your training run for a weekend might be a long, easy run, you will do it in a race environment where you've got camaraderie, you've got people around you to keep you company. You don't have to think of a route because you've got a route planned out for you. You don't have to think too much about your nutrition because there's water points laid out for you. That is what we mean by running a race and not necessarily racing it. That running a race is absolutely vital to be able to hold yourself back and stick to what your training plan says. So for example, an easy race. If you are one of those athletes who gets to the start line and you have an easy run on your program for today, but the minute that gun goes off, your eyes change color, your hamster just lets loose, and it's a race and you can't hold yourself back, rather stay at home and do that run on your own, because you are going to defeat the purpose of what you're trying to achieve in that training run if you are going to push and try and race because there's a guy standing next to you and you need to make sure that you cross that finish line before him or her. I really do want to urge you, you need to be able to hold yourself back, differentiate between when am I racing and when am I trying to just follow my training plan or my easy run or whatever the run is set out, but using a race environment in order to get that, just to take a little bit of pressure off the mind and to keep things a little bit fresh.
Now that you understand why you shouldn't race every weekend, let's go through the distances and have a look at how often, once you are in the right shape, how often or how many races you can do per distance, and then by implication, how many times you can perhaps race in a year. So if you're someone who's focusing on the 5K distance, we can get you into really good shape between 8 and 12-week plan. During that process, you could possibly do 1 or 2 5Ks to get you up to your peak race. But really, once you are in shape for that 5K, it's possible to race for the next 3 to 4 weekends in a row until you start to get mentally stale and it gets a little bit hard to get yourself G'd up for the effort, and also as you feel your performance start to tail off. Of course, if those races are going to be every 2 to 3 weeks, then we can extend that period to probably an 8-week period where you race between 3 and 6 5-kilometer races. If you structure your training like that, you could probably get yourself through 3 cycles of 5K training in a year, which essentially means that through the course of the year, when it comes to 5Ks, you can race quite a few times. You can probably do in the region of 15 to 20 5K races through the year. When we move into 10Ks, it's fairly similar. We wouldn't do the 10Ks in the build-up to your main 10K race. We might use a couple of 5Ks, but the principle is fairly similar. Once you hit 10K and you're fit enough to perform really well in a 10K, you could probably do 2, maybe 3 10Ks in a row after that, off of that training. By going on to a bit of a maintenance plan, you can extend that out a little bit more and maybe get to 4 of those 10Ks. Again, you're probably capable of getting through at least 2, possibly 3 training cycles for a 10K in a year. So we're looking at somewhere in the region of maybe 10 to maximum 15 10-kilometer races in a year. Once we move beyond that and you start moving into half marathons, then the recovery from the effort in the half marathon starts to play a bigger factor, and so it becomes quite difficult, for example, to build yourself up to a half and then to do one too soon after that. So we really do want to give ourselves time after a half marathon to recover a little bit for a week or 2, to then get back into the groove of training, and then to perhaps train for another half marathon. So in half marathon, you could probably do 3 halves pretty comfortably, perhaps a 4th if you manage the recovery well, and we look at after the first really good preparation, the next preparation phase maybe been 10 weeks, you could get away with 4, but I'd say ideally you want to look at doing 3 half marathons in a year if half marathon is your distance. When we move into the marathon, it becomes much more complicated because we do so much damage. And in fact, I would put ultras and marathons into a very similar bracket in terms of the amount of damage that's been done. There's a little bit more damage done in an ultra for sure, but because of the recovery time, 2 to 3 weeks, and then getting back into it over 2 to 3 weeks. So essentially just the recovery phase from getting out of the ultras and marathons is going to take you between 4 and 6 weeks before you're back into full training. So it's purely the recovery from those races that limits the amount of times that you can safely race in a year. I would either be doing a marathon and an ultra, or 2 marathons or 2 ultras, but I certainly wouldn't be doing 2 marathons and 2 ultras, or 2 marathons and an ultra. So what's important to understand is that not even elite athletes race more than 2 marathons or ultras in a year, and that's because recovery from these races is so important. So important that it bears repeating that we want to recover for 2 to 3 weeks after marathons and ultras, and then build back up to full training over another 2 to 3 weeks. And purely for those reasons, it's not really possible to race more than 2 marathons or ultras in a year.
As runners, we all love races. We love the environment and being in a race or being part of a race environment. It is, again, just important to know what is the goal or what are you trying to achieve in that. If today is the day you want to run a PR and you've planned and everything's prepped to that day, then yes, go and leave it all out there and make sure you have a good run, and we hope you do too. If, however, you're on a training run, hold yourself back, discipline, discipline, discipline. Get what you are trying to achieve out of that particular session. I hope you got some good value out of this video. Remember to hit the like and subscribe button. If you're looking for any help with preparation for your next training event, check out the link on screen now to a training plan we've put together, and feel free to check out some of our other video content.